Would you date someone who's trans? Would you date someone who's black? Would you date someone who's fat? Would you date someone who's disabled?
All at the same time? So, as you can see, we're about to have this person explain to us why our preferences for dating and relationships are problematic. Take it away.
Now, honestly, I don't know what your answer is to those questions, but I've met a surprising number of people who would say no to all or at least some of them.
It's almost like different people prefer different things when it comes to forming a relationship with somebody.
Their argument is that it's just a preference and that you can't control who you're attracted to.
For starters, no one needs an argument as to why they are or are not attracted to someone. That is a personal preference. See, the thing about personal preferences is, well, it's that they're personal, and no one has any right to dictate what someone else's personal preference is. You'll note the smug little spoilers "it's not" message there on the screen. So apparently attraction is now a choice, thus invalidating the very sexualities of the LGBT people Riley here is a strong proponent of.
I think most of the time that this is brought up, it's in regards to race. I'll link to a couple really good videos in the description about racial dating preferences, but in this video, I want to talk about our other biases.
Alright, so before we move on to those other so-called biases, let's go over the racial dating preferences. I don't think racial dating preferences are racist. They could be, but they're not always. Just because you don't want to be in an intimate relationship with someone of another race, it doesn't automatically mean you think of them as lesser people overall. For example, if you're not gay, but you have a gay friend and wouldn't date them, doesn't mean you're homophobic, it just means you aren't attracted to the same sex. It's entirely possible that you're just not attracted to the features a certain race typically has. Now, in the same vein, it's possible to be attracted to a certain race because of the features they typically have. Now, I will say that it's a little bit short-sighted to make a claim such as, I'm not attracted to X race, or all men or women of X race are attractive, being that you haven't seen every single person who is a part of that race, but if you're going on personal experience, it makes a bit more sense. I think it's also important to note here that people of all races do this. A lot of the times you'll see this framed as, oh, well, white people say they won't date someone of some other race, but I've seen it from just about every race.
Let's start with trans people.
Why am I not surprised that this is where we're starting? Can you say self-interest?
Would you date a trans person, honestly? Think about it for a second.
I don't even need a second. The answer is just no. An explanation isn't owed here, but straight guys are attracted to women. Now, you might be saying, trans women are women. Well, if trans women were just women, we wouldn't be calling them trans women. There is a clear difference between a biological woman's body and someone who is trans, especially without extensive surgery. This is not an insult, it's just reality. Being trans is an anomaly, whether you want to accept that or not, and being an anomaly is going to make dating tougher because you don't fit into the categories that the majority of people do. Not being attracted to someone doesn't mean you hate them or fear them. It just means they don't have the features that get your noodle going.
Okay, got your answer? Well, if you said no, I'm sorry, but that's pretty discriminatory.
The rules of attraction are discriminatory by default. Unless you're attracted to absolutely everything, you discriminate on some level when you choose a partner. This is absurd.
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you're a horrible person who hates trans people. There was probably a time in my life when I said I wouldn't date a trans person, but since then, I've thought critically about it and changed my mind.
Okay, great. So you're not calling people hateful. Well, good for you. However, I find it interesting that you claim you thought critically about it when you're very clearly trans yourself. Call me crazy, but I feel like that had something to do with you changing your mind about whether or not you'd date a trans person. I mean, seeing as how it would be a little hypocritical to be trans and then claim you wouldn't date, say, a trans man, yeah.
I could sit here and show you photos of conventionally attractive trans people. There are definitely trans people who you would never know are trans unless they told you, because they pass for cis. And that might convince some of you. But I think arguing that you would only like a trans person if you didn't know they were trans is a poor argument.
It's actually not an argument at all, because trying to convince someone they should be attracted to a certain type of person is controlling to an insane level. The reason they might find themselves attracted to a passing person if they didn't realize they were trans is because they are under the illusion that said person is part of the group their sexuality aligns with being attracted to. People need equal rights in regards to the law so that companies can't have discriminatory practices and people can have equal opportunities. Great, agreed, you got 'em. But in our personal lives, people have the freedom to choose for themselves who they form relationships with and why, and to suggest otherwise is to ignore our autonomy and consent.
I think you could be attracted to any trans person, whether they pass or not. I think the main concern that people have in regards to dating a trans person is that they won't have the genitals that they expect.
You have to be so divorced from reality to believe that's the main reason that I'm almost not sure how to respond to this. See, in nature, males and females form relationships and have sex for procreation. Obviously, human beings have advanced, for the lack of a better term, beyond that, and form relationships and have sex to express love and pleasure. Or maybe just the latter, since we're in a sex-positive world and I am not a sex-positive girl. Anyway, the point is people shouldn't have to warp their sexuality and personal preferences just so no one gets offended or feels discriminated against.
Because we associate penises with men and vaginas with women, some people think they could never date a trans man with a vagina or a trans woman with a penis. But I think that people are more than their genitals. I think that you could feel attraction to someone without knowing what's between their legs.
There's a reason people make that association. It's because it applies to, somewhere around 99% of the population? People didn't just put genitals in a hat and pick at random which one to associate with men and which one to associate with women. Obviously, people are more than their genitals, but it is an integral part of sexuality and sexual attraction.
And if you were to say that you're only attracted to people with vaginas or people with penises, it really feels like you're reducing people just to their genitals. You're kind of objectifying them, but you're thinking of them more as genitals than objects, so I guess you're kind of genitalifying them?
People with vaginas and people with penises. That's called men and women. You can't argue not reducing people to their genitals and then define them with the very part you're saying isn't a defining factor. If genitals didn't matter at all, then people wouldn't be so easily offended that they feel excluded when someone says men have penises and women have vaginas.
Anyway, my point is, we have implicit biases that we were raised with or that we developed over time, and they can be hard to get rid of.
You are conflating attraction with bias, or rather the only reason people are attracted to certain things is because that's how they were raised. That's just absolutely false. Yes, socialization can play into certain characteristics you find attractive, but part of attraction is also biological, and you can't just ignore that to be a more inclusive person in dating.
And I think this can be especially prominent within the queer community. Gay men often pride themselves on being disgusted by vaginas, and the same goes for lesbian women with penises.
This is what happens when you completely tear down the meaning of terms. Man and woman, it doesn't even mean anything anymore, because you believe that simply identifying as one or the other makes it reality. You can't say anyone can be a man or a woman based on how they feel, and then claim sexuality as something you're born with. If you're just attracted to whoever, and genitals and biology don't come into play at all, then there's no point in even having sexuality, because everyone should be open to dating everyone else, because there are no clear identifiers as to what defines a man or a woman.
People have built their sexual identities on these repulsions, but I don't think they're innate at all. If you met someone who was extremely attractive, had a great personality, but didn't have the genitals that you wanted, you might be surprised to find that it isn't a deal breaker.
Or you might be surprised to find that it is, and you'd think of that person as just a friend. If someone genuinely doesn't care at all, I would argue that at the very least they're not straight.
As someone who is trans and gay, sometimes people ask me with a very accusatory tone if I would date a girl with a penis. Because there's this stereotype that trans lesbians are just predatory cis men creeping on cis women. But the thing is, I absolutely could be attracted to a woman with a penis.
Yeah, because you're gay. Identifying as a woman and then claiming you're gay doesn't make you a lesbian. From the way you're talking, it sounds as though you would be attracted to anything that would have you, which, if that's how you feel, fine, but not everyone feels that way.
We know that sexual orientations are more innate than learned. They're more nature and less nurture. Gay conversion therapy has been proven not to work, but you can unlearn your own prejudices. It just takes time and conscious effort.
Ah, so that's the excuse we're going with as to why sexual orientation isn't discriminatory. Except it completely misses the point of sexuality and removes biology and what constitutes as a biological man or woman from the equation in exchange for an identity game in which any person can have any identity paired with any set of genitals, again, rendering sexual orientation useless.
And the way that we talk about potentially dating trans people has a lot in common with the way we discuss other preferences. Saying that you're not attracted to fat people isn't innate. It's informed by a society that tells you that being thin is ideal.
Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, biologically speaking, people seek partners with which to pass on their genes. Part of that process is selecting a partner who is in good health. Now, I'll admit there are many people that fall victim to buying into what the media portrays as stereotypically attractive, but in general, fat is not indicative of beauty or attractiveness because it is a signifier of someone in poorer health. Even ignoring that, not everyone who doesn't find fat people attractive is just brainwashed. They simply don't find it visually appealing.
Everything in the media you consume is bombarding you with messages that skinny is beautiful and fat is ugly.
Is that why we have fat acceptance and health at every size being pushed by the media? Is that why people like Tess Holliday are being called beautiful and brave? Because everything is telling us fat is ugly? I don't think so.
And even the nicest of people absorb these messages to some degree. But again, if you find someone attractive and really enjoy spending time with them, there's no reason why their weight should be a factor.
What about if they're so fat that they can't even leave their bed? There are absolutely reasons as to why it should be a factor. If you don't take good care of yourself, you can't reasonably expect someone else to take good care of you.
Especially since we know that the relationship between weight and health is extremely complex, and you really can't make any moral judgments on a person based on their weight.
Attraction is not a moral judgment of fat people. Being overweight isn't healthy. Yes, there are some people that have legitimate medical issues that make struggling with weight tough, but many people simply don't put effort into their bodies. Someone who makes an effort to look attractive will often look better than someone who doesn't.
And lastly, let's talk about disabled people. Disabilities come in a very wide range, from being deaf to being in a wheelchair to only having one arm, and I think it's pretty ridiculous to say that you couldn't be attracted to any person who has any of those disabilities.
I'm kind of curious as to who is going around saying this openly and for no reason. It just doesn't seem like something a person would say unless they're specifically asked. Basically, a person would have to be specific about what type of disability they're talking about, since it's kind of a catch-all term for a variety of conditions.
Disabilities can happen to anyone. Someone you're extremely attracted to today could become disabled tomorrow, and that shouldn't make your attraction to them disappear. Though if it does, it might not be because of them, but rather because you have some preconceived ideas about disabled people that are just inaccurate and harmful.
Okay, this is actually a somewhat reasonable point, but I think it steps into territory that is beyond attraction. If you're attracted to someone and, for example, they lose a limb, and you don't find them attractive anymore, it's probably because you don't love them. You were just physically attracted to them. I would argue that this is more about love and less about attraction, because if you love someone, you accept them in their sickness and in health, because you've decided that the person is the one that's most important to you, not just because of attractiveness, but a much deeper connection.
Unsurprisingly, this is another case of the media telling you that a certain group isn't attractive. Disabled people are rarely romantic leads. Their stories in movies and TV shows are often tragic, but that doesn't reflect the reality that disabled people can be happy and have dating lives and be attractive.
Well, a lot of disabilities are brought on by tragic events, and there's a lot of emotional turmoil that comes with coping and accepting your disability. There's a reason they do that on TV. It's for dramatic purposes so that people will want to watch. Of course, there are plenty of people with disabilities that live fulfilling lives and even do incredible things. They even have Olympic sports.
Now, if you're not attracted to someone, you're not attracted to them. I'm not going to tell you that you have to be attracted to this fat person or that trans person or that disabled person. But the more you work at unlearning your own prejudices, the more you'll be able to see people from these groups as people rather than tired stereotypes.
You've spent an entire video trying to tell people they should be attracted to someone regardless of whatever label you placed on them, and now you're claiming you didn't do that. Just because you don't find someone attractive, it doesn't mean you're not thinking of them as people or basing them on stereotypes.
Unlearning our own biases doesn't happen overnight, and I don't have a step-by-step instruction guide for you.
Then what was the purpose of this? If you're not providing a solution, all you've done is posture about how you're so open to being attracted to whatever, and that people who aren't are just being discriminatory. It's divisive and ridiculous, and it sends a bad message.
But I think if you can accept that these prejudices exist in all of us, even you can identify them when they come up and work to change how you think about them.
Unless someone is basing their preference on genuine hatred, there's no reason for them to reflect upon it as though it's a problem and work to change it. Because it's their personal life. and they are in control of who they become romantically involved with.
It will most likely be a long, slow process, but I think it's worth it. Because these dating preferences are ultimately harmful to people who don't fit into your box of what a conventionally attractive person looks like.
People are not and never will be attracted to everyone they come across. This statement is just crazy. Everyone has a so-called box of attractiveness and who fits into it and who doesn't. Also, stating a preference doesn't automatically mean you will never date someone who doesn't fit into your box. It just means that more often than not, you prefer X attribute.
It makes people feel isolated, alone, and unwanted to hear that they're universally unattractive to people.
There are many different things that make many different types of people feel alone and unattractive and isolated. Even people who are considered conventionally attractive experience this when they face rejection because, surprise, everyone gets rejected at some point because they're not considered attractive by the person they're pursuing. This is life. Being rejected by someone doesn't mean you are considered universally unattractive.
I don't think there's anyone out there who somebody doesn't find attractive. We're sold this image of the conventionally attractive person, but in reality, all kinds of people around the world are constantly dating, having sex, finding people attractive, getting married.
If there's no one out there who someone doesn't find attractive, then this whole entire subject is a non-issue, and all a person needs to do is keep searching until they find that person who reciprocates their interest. That's what people seeking a meaningful relationship do, and it is not specific to the identities you mentioned in this video.
It's not only the conventionally attractive who find love or have sex. So by working on ourselves to dispel that idea, we can make the world a more welcoming and loving place for everybody, no matter how they look.
Okay, you keep saying conventionally attractive people. There is no worldwide idea of conventionally attractive because depending on where you live, that idea changes. So again, if it's not only conventionally attractive people who find success in the dating world, then you have debunked yourself. Some people will undoubtedly find it harder than others to find a partner, but it's much better to wait it out for the right person that is genuinely attracted to them for who they are, rather than having someone who is trying to defeat their biases by being with them. Before I finish this up, let's talk a little bit about attraction. So first, there is the initial attraction you feel when you see someone and your brain says, hey, this person is very visually appealing to me. This is kind of a gateway that allows people to take interest in someone, and then they can strike up a conversation and learn more about the person as an individual. If you've got physical attraction and some common values and interests, chances are that based on that you will find them more attractive, and then you've got yourself a potential relationship. It's totally possible to think someone is physically attractive, and then when you get to know them as a person, you realize there's nothing there that allows you to form a meaningful bond with them. Even if someone doesn't want to be with you based on a prejudice, why does it matter? Why would you want to be with someone that you have to convince you are worthy of seeing as a dating partner? You just have to accept that they're not the type of person you should try to get involved with, and you move on. This is just entitlement to an astronomical level, and quite frankly, it's absurd to see it coming from a self-proclaimed feminist when one of their major arguments is that men who won't take no for an answer when asking out a woman are just entitled. Trying to make someone see you as attractive is the very definition of entitlement. No one owes you anything, and if someone doesn't look at you as a potential romantic partner, you get over it. You don't act like it's some sort of social cause that needs addressing because, as I said, dating itself is a discriminatory process. You eliminate people from your dating pool based on whatever characteristics and attributes you deem attractive. Some of those are going to be very shallow because, let's face it, there's a lot of shallow people out there that don't look beneath the surface. However, the identities you mentioned here are not the only ones discriminated against when it comes to dating. So picking and choosing which ones are important is kind of ridiculous because you can claim any preference is discriminatory. The only way to stop that is to be open to everyone as a potential romantic partner, and that is completely unrealistic. Thank you for watching.
I'm the only